Internal Revenue Service IRS tax news. Beware of, quote, ghost, end quote, preparers who don't sign tax returns. IR 2021-30, February 5th, 2021, Washington. The Internal Revenue Service reminds taxpayers to avoid, quote, ghost, end quote, tax return preparers whose refusal to sign returns can cause a frightening array of problems. Note that when we're thinking about the tax preparation process, there's two things we want to keep in mind. One is to get to the immediate goal of just getting the tax preparation done for the current year, and then hopefully getting a refund, and hopefully getting that refund as soon as possible. But then two, thinking about how to make the process as easy in the future and do tax planning into the future. Now, if you have a more basic type of return, you're probably going to be more focused on the first item. So, for example, if you're not itemizing, if you don't have any business income like a Schedule C type of income, and if your adjusted gross income is below a certain threshold, and most of your income is coming from W-2 or employer type of income, you're an employee of an employer type of income, you may have a more basic type of return, and in that situation, you may be able to complete your return with the help and use of resources, possibly free resources, which you can find, for example, or start to find on the IRS website by looking at free file options for that, which could then take you to third-party software, which has free options for the preparation of the tax return. Those softwares typically being in the format of interview processes. Hopefully for a basic return, those interview processes being sufficient to guide you through and give you the support you need for the preparation of the tax return. Then at some point in time, you might have tax returns that are more complicated, and that might have happened in 2020. So for example, you might have more business income at this point in time, or you might be itemizing for whatever reason at some point in time. Your AGI might, if your adjusted gross income or your income level goes over a certain threshold, then your tax return will typically become more complex. And at that point, you might want to hire someone both to help you out with the immediate need of preparing the tax return right now, but really you want someone at that point in time that's going to help make things easier in the future. Because if you started a new business or something like that, then it's not going to go away next year. You want someone that you can then ask about the tax consequences that's going to happen basically in the future. So that's when you want to look for the tax professional. And when you're looking for the tax professional, just make sure that you're thinking about the long term. You're thinking about the future. What you want to be careful of is a scamming type of situation. And a scamming type of situation will typically look something like this. You've got a tax preparer that possibly will be promising large returns, maybe such as refunds, and maybe they even charge based on the amount of the refund that they get, which would mean that they have a big incentive to maximize the amount of the refund in that point in time. So you don't really want that usually, because if they do something fraudulent, if they're too aggressive on the tax return or they flat out lie on the tax return, then they're just your agent, meaning you're still the one the IRS is going to come back to. The letter that the IRS is going to come back to will be you, and that could happen with the statute of limitation is at least 3 years, so they could come back within 3 years. And oftentimes, if you're dealing with someone in that situation, the tax preparer has now left. They won't be around anymore in 3 years when the audit happens, so that the refund benefit that you may have gotten could possibly be taken in the future. If you get an audit or something like that, the IRS takes it back and you don't have the support of someone to help you out with that. So what you want to do then is make sure when you're hiring someone that's going to be around for a long period of time. One of the indicators that you would have a scam type of tax preparer that you probably do not want to be dealing with is if they refuse to put their name on the tax return. Just remember that the fact that someone puts their name on the tax return, even if they're a legitimate tax preparer, and they let the IRS know who they are exactly, it still doesn't mean that they're going to be primarily responsible, because the IRS still sees the individual as the one primarily responsible, even if they hired a tax professional as basically kind of like their agent to help them fill out the tax return. The IRS will still come back to the individual, but the IRS does want the information for the tax preparer as well on the return as well. And if the tax preparer does not put their information on the tax return, that's a bad sign. That's a sign that they might disappear 3 years later when you have an audit or something like that. A problem happens. So when you're looking for the tax preparation, and you also want someone that's going to be able to do estimates and whatnot in the future and help you out with that kind of information if you have more complex situations as well. So back to the text. It is important to file a valid, accurate tax return because the taxpayer is ultimately responsible for it. Ghost preparers get their scary name because they don't sign tax returns, they prepare. Like a ghost, they try to be invisible to the fact they've prepared the return and will print the return and get the taxpayer to sign and mail it. So notice if that is something that's happening, like if the preparer is saying basically, I want you to pay me, but I don't want to put my name on the return. I don't want to e-file the return. I want to mail the return. Well, that's a bad sign, right? That's a bad sign, and you probably want to avoid that. So for an e-file returns, the ghost preparer will prepare but refuse to digitally sign it as the paid preparer. By law, anyone who is paid to prepare or assist in preparing federal tax returns must have a valid preparer tax identification number, a PTIN. So there's a link to the PTIN here. Paid preparers must sign and include their PTIN on the return. Not signing a return is a red flag that the paid preparer may be looking to make a fast buck by promising a big refund or charging fees based on the size of the refund. So notice again, that would be the other indication. One, if they don't sign it, that's a big red flag, right? And if they're charging their fees based on the refund, you're typically really not supposed to do that because that incentivizes the preparer to be very aggressive, if not, if they're dishonest and fraudulent, right, in order to increase the refund. And you don't want that because you're the one that's primarily responsible for the accuracy of the return, and the IRS may come back at some later point. So you want peace of mind so that you don't have to worry about it. So unscrupulous tax return preparers may also require payment in cash only and not provide a receipt, invent income to qualify their clients for tax credits. So again, notice what might happen if you're paying someone and they're doing some kind of scam type of thing and they're charging you based on the amount of refund. They might require a cash only payment. Why would they require a cash only payment? Because then you can't prove that you paid them, right? So then there's no evidence that they were a paid tax preparer, which would be, again, if they were a paid tax preparer, they're supposed to do certain things in order to be a paid tax preparer. So invent income to qualify their clients for tax credits. Now you might think that this is funny. Why would you invent income? Because normally if you had income, it's an income tax. You would think if your income was higher, then you would owe more taxes. But this type of situation, they're typically going to be targeting people that might have lower incomes and might be aiming at the refundable tax credit, like a child tax credit and an earned income tax credit. And they actually, to get those credits, you can actually, fraudulate the tax return by increasing income. So they might actually put income on there because that will increase the amount of these refundable credits. So even though the tax liability may be zero, they may qualify for these refundable credits, and that's obviously a vulnerable point for the IRS that they're skeptical of. And they're also more critical about it as well. They try to track the returns a little bit longer because of these refundable credits. So you want to be careful of that. And again, they have 3 years to kind of come back and question you about it. So you don't want to have any problems. You want it to be as straightforward if they have questions about it, so you can just answer the questions later. So claim fake deductions to boost the size of the refund. So obviously if they're on a taxable side of things, this would be the more normal situation where the tax is a tax, you owe taxes. And then if they make up fake deductions, of course, to lower the taxes, then that would be bad. Direct refunds into their bank account, not the taxpayer's account. So note that you're not supposed to do that. So if they basically say, hey, look, we're going to route your refund directly into our account instead of into your bank account, then you're not supposed to do that. That's not a good sign. You don't want them if they do the tax return, they do the tax return and then you pay them. It shouldn't be that they do the tax return and then they get paid by the government in the format of your refund, right? So that's going to be typically a bad sign as well. So the IRS urges taxpayers to choose a tax return preparer wisely. The Choosing a Tax Professional page on irs.gov has information about the tax preparer credentials and qualifications. So there's a link to Choosing a Tax Professional and credentials and qualifications. The IRS Directory of Federal Tax Return Preparers with credentials and selected qualifications, there's a link to that here, can help identify many preparers by type of credential or qualification. No matter who prepares the return, the IRS urges taxpayers to review it carefully and ask questions about anything not clear before signing. So remember, the tax preparer is basically your agent, and you are primarily responsible. The IRS, when auditing, if they have a question, will come to you, and the tax preparer hopefully will be around to help you at that point. But remember that you want to be questioning anything that you have a question on, and make sure that you have the verification on it and feel comfortable with what is on the return. So taxpayers should verify both their routing and bank account number on the completed tax return for any direct deposit refund, and taxpayers should watch out for preparers putting their bank account information into the returns. Taxpayers can report preparer misconduct to the IRS using Form 14157. There's a link to that here. That's the Complaint Tax Return Preparer. If a taxpayer suspects a tax preparer filed a changed their tax return without their consent, they should file Form 14157-A, Tax Return Preparer Fraud or Misconduct Affidavit. There's a link to those items here. There'll be a link to this in the description.